Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kim Irish Heinonen and I'm joined by my colleague Ariella Morrison today for a discussion around navigating hard conversations with clients and coworkers. Thank you so much to the Legal Aid Association of California for hosting us. By its nature, our legal system creates or contributes to challenging conversations. In legal aid settings, staff compassionately serve clients whose cases often cause them enormous stress. Societal shortcomings like a lack of adequate safety nets, challenges finding support for mental health, and wariness toward the legal profession may exacerbate tense conversations between legal aid staff and those seeking their help. Even co-counsel and coworker relationships can feel adversarial when disagreements about strategizing cases and delivering services arise. It is essential, however, to helping a client understanding his or her options and to charting the most successful path for a case, program, and organization that legal services staff successfully navigate these dynamics. In this training today, we will offer strategies for planning and maneuvering through hard conversations. This training will focus on conflict styles and best practices models for respectfully resolving disagreement. So Ariella and I work for OneJustice, a statewide support center for California's legal services organizations. OneJustice strengthens legal aid providers by providing nonprofit management consulting, coaching, and technical support. You can find our website on the slide there. I want to review our agenda for today. So first, actually, let's say I want to acknowledge that we're not always good at holding ourselves to all of these strategies and tactics. We try to the best of our abilities, but sometimes the concepts are a little bit easier said than done. And we, like everyone else, slip up at times because we're all human, right? But because these strategies and tactics may not always feel natural, at OneJustice, we have done a lot of reading and thinking about how to be better communicators and how to make it more possible for us to tackle these hard conversations. So the results of all of this reading, thinking, and trying kind of in real time to do better is what we're sharing with you today. So today's agenda includes, we'll be talking about your role in hard conversations, 8 tools that you can use when facing a challenging conversation, 5 approaches to conflict, nonviolent or compassionate communication, and we'll be sharing some additional resources as well. So our learning objectives for today. So conversations are the backbone and also the workhorses of our organizations. Lots of these conversations can be fun. So new program design, productive team meetings, some client counseling, that can all be kind of fun and interesting. But some of the conversations that we have to do are also kind of terrible too. And we sometimes tend to avoid them if we can. But often they end up sort of, falling in our laps and we need to deal with them. So we frequently have both of these kinds of conversations, both the more fun ones and the less fun ones, without even maybe noticing or paying attention like closely to what we're feeling about those. And that's fine most of the time, especially with the fun ones, because part of what makes those conversations seem a little more fun or pleasant is that they're working, right? That we're not noticing anything sort of deeper going on that's not working. But that can often make the hard ones even a little bit harder. So what we're going to do today is to analyze, think about, plan for, and then hopefully eventually have those tough conversations. So the learning objectives for today's session are that you all will gain a self-awareness about the 5 personal conflict styles and when to use them, or when to best to use them to learn a model for engaging in constructive conflict resolution that includes things like active listening and non-blaming language. Today, we'll talk about how feelings, emotions, intents, and values play into hard conversations, including yours. Today is also about structural concepts, including how to first be aware of and then manage the impact of feelings, emotions, and intent and values, communications, and workplace conflicts. It is also not about trying to psychoanalyze the other party to your conversation. although that's sometimes very tempting to do, but it's not about that. Today is actually about quite the opposite. So because this training counts as 1 hour of general MCLE credit, we want to share some information about about fulfilling your obligations and professional standards as an attorney or a legal services administrator. So managers must ensure that there are clear policies in place and they must be followed by other lawyers and non-lawyers. These rules can be challenging at times when having hard conversations. I'm going to just briefly read this slide and the next one to share this information with you. So Rule 5.1, responsibilities of managerial and supervisory lawyers, basically states that it requires lawyers with managerial authority to make reasonable efforts to establish internal policies and procedures designed to detect and resolve conflicts of interest, identify dates by which actions must be taken in pending matters, account for client funds and property, and ensure that inexperienced lawyers are properly supervised. And then the next rule, 5.3, responsibilities regarding non-lawyer assistance. So lawyers often work with non-lawyer personnel, including secretaries, investigators, law student interns, and other paraprofessionals. A lawyer must give these assistants appropriate instruction and supervision concerning all ethical aspects of the employment, taking into account that they may not have had legal training. Okay, so now we're going to get into, we're going to see a few of these slides throughout where it says exercise. We're going to start by delving into one hard conversation you might be avoiding right now. So let me frame this for you, and then we're going to give you a couple of minutes to spend on this. So first, we'll ask you to sort of grab your worksheet, and I believe that has been sort of dropped into the chat. And if it hasn't, Megan, if you don't mind doing that, that would be fabulous. Thank you. So, and if you don't have that, grab a piece of paper or open up a document on your computer and just use that. We're going to use today to put a little bit of structure around one specific hard conversation that you need to have. So I would note that this workshop today will be more beneficial to you the more sort of detail you have around this conversation. So rather than kind of think abstractly about like, oh, I have a few people I supervise where I need to have tough conversations, and generally this is how I might deal with it, I would think very specifically about one particular conversation. So get very concrete who the conversation needs to be with, what kind of content that might contain, what might be making you nervous about it, etc. We're going to be stopping at different points during this webinar and give you time to jot down ideas, questions, some data points maybe, and some next steps specific to your particular hard conversation. So now I'm going to give you like 2 minutes and write down on that piece of paper the other person that you need to have this conversation with and the context and how long you've been waiting to tackle this. So the other person that you need to have a conversation with, what the context is generally, and how long it has been since you needed to sort of have this conversation. If you feel comfortable, this is no pressure at all. You don't need to do this if you don't want, but you can message me or Ariella into the private chat boxes, and we can read some of them out loud without sharing any identifying information if you want, but no worries. So I'm going to set a timer and give everyone 2 minutes for that.
So one of the topics that came into the chat is an issue around timely case closure. And if you're having trouble accessing the workshop, you can just use or worksheet, you can use a piece of paper.
Okay, that's been 2 minutes. Thank you all for engaging in that. And I think we're going to move on to our next piece. And I think, Ari, that I'm going to turn it over to you for the next slide.
So before we dig into the 8 tools we're going to share today, it can be helpful to gain a deeper understanding of why approaching these conversations with clients and coworkers can feel so intimidating or challenging for many of us. We can think about hard conversations as an iceberg. It's natural and definitely easier to focus on resolving that first layer of the iceberg, what we can see on top of the water. That's the presenting issue, the presenting challenge or conflict. I want to invite us now and throughout this training to search a little deeper. What could be happening under the surface, under the water? What are those hidden, perhaps unspoken issues? These can be structural, systemic, emotional. They can be rooted in trauma, family patterns, social norms. We often don't know enough about our clients' lives, our coworkers' lives, to fully understand where they're coming from. But as a starting point, we can seek to understand what's going on below the surface, underneath the water for us. So again, we're going back to our hard conversations, back to your worksheet or your piece of paper. You should have already written down the other person, a short statement of the content or context of that conversation, and how long perhaps you've been waiting to tackle that conversation. Now, we want you to take a moment to think about that conversation and what could be 1 to 3 of those under the surface challenges. For you, you can also think about what could be those under the surface challenges for the other person. In addition to putting it on your worksheet or your piece of paper, you could also put any under the surface issues that come to mind for you in the chat if you're comfortable. So in these trainings, we invite participants to slow down their processes a bit, to try to gather a little bit more data or details about what's actually going on before jumping into these hard conversations. So because it can give us space to make better and less reactive choices when we're going into these conversations. So I'll give another 30 seconds for you to think about what could those under the surface challenges or issues be. And again, we invite you to put them in the chat as well. I'm seeing in the chat too much work, disruptive symptoms of disabilities, wanting to avoid hurt feelings, issues around staff members dressing what could be inappropriately or unprofessionally, discomfort with clients' pain, our own limitations. So now I want to invite you to take your finger and touch your nose. This is the accountable person. The one point of commonality in all the conversations that we have is you, is me, is us. If you're having a lot of hard conversations that aren't going as well as you would like, we're all the easiest factors to change. We have the power to change how we're showing up in these conversations. We can change how our colleagues or our clients are showing up for these conversations. That's not our job. Our job is to show up as our best selves in these conversations. And I know from experience that this is way easier said than done. While we can't ignore the systems of oppression we operate and the effect that power dynamics at work and in our clients' lives have, at the end of the day, how we respond to and engage in conflict begins and ends with us. One of the conflict resolution experts, Priya Parker, who also wrote The Art of Gathering, has a quote that I really like. She says that healthy conflict is love tapping fear on the shoulder saying, I got this. So again, I want to invite you to touch your nose and to say out loud right now, I got this. You're all on mute, so you can do it without being embarrassed from the comfort of your office or your home right now. If your coworkers or your family members can hear you say, I got this, then you can just give them a big smile.
Okay, so what's the goal? This is something, of course, that is an important thing to be considering as you delve into, or actually prior to having your important and possibly hard conversation. The possible goals that you might hold include finding balance for yourself and the conversation partner. That's the person, I'll refer to that person as the conversation partner, the person with whom you need to have the conversation. You could have a goal of maintaining neutrality during the conversation. We might have a goal of maintaining a sense of control, and also have a goal of examining which choices might be available, and maybe presenting those or discussing them further with your conversation partner. And so I'm going to ask everyone to take a second to reflect a little bit and consider what your goal might be for your own hard conversation. If you feel open to it, please feel free to comment in the chat anything, either your own goal, if it's one of these, if it's something else, but also anything else that you might add. Because certainly this isn't a comprehensive list of potential goals that you might have. Like, what are we missing here? We know that there's a lot of wisdom in the room, so we invite you to share. Balance, smooth working relationship, morale, making things fair for everyone. Yeah. Neutrality, yeah. Achieving the goals of the law firm that you work for, yeah. Great. Psychological safety for everyone. Lots of great goals coming in, thank you. Feeling of integrity. Yeah, I think these really go to a lot of the kind of important core values that we have as humans and that we bring into our workplace, that we want to embody when we're working with our clients and our coworkers. So super important. Thank you for sharing, everyone. So there's a picture on this slide of a kind of a pretty field, like sort of in a valley, it looks like. And I'm just going to read the quote that's on this slide. Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. I don't know who said that quote, unfortunately. So I apologize that I can't provide a source. But what I will say is that everyone has different values and motivations. I really like to think that we can work toward giving up on right and wrong as part of the analysis. It can be really difficult, but I think we can get to a different place sometimes. Oh, thank you. Somebody shared that is a Rumi quote. Thank you so much for letting us know that. So let me give an example of sort of a situation, I guess, that that might kind of illustrate this idea of getting away from wrongdoing and right doing. So it's kind of a simple example, and maybe not as relevant in today's in today's post or current COVID world, where many of us are still working remotely much of the time. But imagine that you're working in an office with about 10 other employees or even more, and you're sharing a kitchen sink. Folks leave their dirty dishes after they have lunch, and it's gotten kind of full, a little bit gross. There's like gross sort of food everywhere, water that's kind of icky, etc. So there's many discussions at staff meetings about the dishes, the fact that there's a stack of dirty dishes often in the sink. A few people say they don't even notice it. They don't understand why you have to talk about this every month. One employee notes that it's embarrassing to have meetings in the office and to have clients see that there's a pile of dirty dishes in the kitchen. Another employee suggests that you all write up a schedule, agree upon sort of almost like a chore chart, right, for cleaning the dishes. And then another employee is kind of irritated that grown people have to be sort of reminded to do their dishes, right? Like this isn't, we're not teenagers, we're not kids or something. But so the issue, that everybody is sort of having different feelings about, right, is the same, right? There's dirty dishes in the sink. What are we going to do about that? But the values and motivation that everyone has, all these different employees have around the dirty dishes are different. They're different for each person involved. So people are feeling different things about each, about the same situation. Some might rather not discuss it. They really, either they don't notice it or they're more comfortable, or excuse me, they're more uncomfortable with tension at meetings discussing it. They'd rather sort of, just pretend it's not there, maybe like a little bit like an ostrich burying its head in the sand. Some feel this is kind of a matter of respect for self, others, clients coming into the office, that it's important, that is kind of an important value to the person who feels embarrassed about having clients come in and see a pile of dirty dishes in the sink. Some folks might feel this is a matter of just a cooperation, right? There's a core value of that person who wants to, figure out a schedule for getting this done. Everybody can contribute, we'll assign roles, etc. And then some might focus more on accountability. Maybe the person who felt a little irritated, like, I can't believe we have to talk about this. Like, let's just figure out, what is this? We need to have somebody accountable for this. Let's figure out who the person is who's leaving these dishes, and then we're gonna, make sure that they correct their behavior. So just wanted to illustrate that while everyone has maybe different values and motivations around this sort of simple illustration of a common problem, by like kind of looking at what the values and motivation are, it might be possible to get beyond this idea of there being a right way and a wrong way of doing things, and looking at the deeper human motivations that we have, and figuring out ways that we can sort of address those, and hopefully include all those different values and motivations in coming up with a solution. So next, we want to offer some ideas for your personal toolbox, as we're calling it, that you can access when facing a challenging conversation with a client or a coworker. We're going to go into these in greater detail in the next few slides, but I'm going to just name them now on this particular slide in front of you. I'll also note that there is a handout you can access that has this information on it as well. So it's kind of a takeaway that you can have after this webinar to have with you if you want to ever refer to it and think about the tools in your toolbox. So the tools are beach ball, lockbox, no assumptions, tabletop, word choice, questions, active listening, and emotional intelligence. So we'll go into beach ball, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is first. So imagine you're in a circle with some folks, indoors or outdoors, it doesn't really matter, playing with a beach ball, right? You can even imagine a group of kids playing with a beach ball. It's striped, it's like yellow, red, blue, orange, green. And each person in the circle has a view of one color of the stripe. One stripe mainly. So, to that person, the ball looks yellow, mainly yellow or red, etc. So, and they might think of the ball in terms of that, right? As opposed to a striped ball with many colors, many different facets, right? It might kind of seem like, okay, this is a yellow ball. It's coming at me. You know, I see somebody's throwing it at me. I see the yellow part. Similarly, each person in a conversation has a piece of the truth. If you're each able to transparently, honestly, frankly describe the stripe that you see, right, which is your own experience, your own perspective, the truth, you know, according to what your experience is, then you can get all of those perspectives on the table equally, and then you can hopefully get to a different place in your conversation. And it's really important to remember that your stripe is probably a different color than other folks' stripes. None of you are more right or wrong than the other. You know, everyone has sort of a piece of this truth that they see the ball in this one particular way. So that's one tool we want to offer you.
The next is the lockbox. So what's this one all about? Throughout our work days, when we're meeting with clients and colleagues, we inevitably go through a range of emotions. Some relate to work, some don't. Some of our more positive emotions could be excitement, relief, joy, satisfaction, amusement, serenity. Some of our more negative emotions may be frustration, boredom, sadness, resentment. One of the things that makes hard conversations and conflict management so challenging is that it is almost certainly guaranteed to involve a range of emotions. So imagine a lockbox or a suitcase that you can lock up. Imagine that this is where you can pack away any of your emotions during these hard conversations or when you're having a disagreement. You can put your emotions in there to get some distance from them. You can peek in if you want to visit them and you can see how they're doing. You can name them, but you are in control when it comes to releasing them. With the key to your lockbox in your hands, your emotions aren't controlling you, what you say or what choices you make. Now, the person that we're in a disagreement with or we're having a harder conversation with doesn't have a key to our lockboxes or our suitcases. We can invite them in, and we can invite them to see inside if we want to, but that is up to us. If a conversation partner decides to release their emotions from their lockbox when we're talking, which emotions they release are also up to them, but they're not our responsibility. We're not responsible for what is in other people's lockboxes or suitcases or how they handle what's inside. The next tool is around assumptions. So assumptions are a necessary part of life. They operate as shortcuts. They help us save time. They're efficient. But when we're having these harder conversations or disagreements, it's really natural for us. We often make predictions and interpret each other's behavior based on assumptions stemming from our own previous experiences. So this third tool that we're offering is to try not to assume that you know the other person's story. It's really easy to be like, oh, she just behaves that way because she's craving attention. Whether it's good or bad, she doesn't care. But we don't know what's actually going on with other people, what they're actually going through. So it's not really fair for us to fill in what we think they may be feeling or thinking, or even assume what kind of resolution they're seeking. We can't write other people's scripts for them. We don't know what's going on in their heads or in their lockbox, their emotional lockboxes. So we have to ask. Lawyers and people who work in legal settings are usually really good at asking questions, but not always the kinds of questions that are helpful in these harder conversations. So in a few slides, we're going to get to what kinds of questions we should be asking, and you may have some ideas. The next tool is the tabletop. So this is another tool that can help us have agency over our emotions. When we're making dinner for guests, for example, we're in control of the menu, what we're serving to guests. But instead of putting food on the table, and for this tool, you can replace the menu with emotions. So we can put our emotions on the table if and when we want to. Again, it's easier said than done, but we can do our best. So that first step is identifying what emotions we're having, and then we can make that decision whether we want to release them from the lockbox and put them on the table. Again, we have that choice, but the idea is to be aware of them, identify them, and then lock them away if we need to, and take them out if we want to. We don't want to make choices or say things based on or driven by those emotions. So if there are emotions, then we can name them. For example, I'm feeling pretty upset right now, so I want to take a 5-minute break before we continue. But if these emotions are happening to the other person, it's not our job to name those. It's not our job to name their emotions, but we can name their observable behavior. We don't know what emotions are behind that behavior. Again, we can't make assumptions. Some people cry when they're uncomfortable, but some people laugh when they're about to cry. But we can say things like, Kim is going to be my example today. So Kim, it looks like you're starting to tear up. I'm seeing tears in your eyes. Would you like to take a 5-minute break? Or Kim, you've been raising your voice in this conversation and you're interrupting me and you're shouting. Can you please stop interrupting me and wait until I'm finished? So Kim raising her voice, that's an observable behavior. Kim having tears in her eyes, that's an observable behavior, but I'm not naming the emotions that she may be feeling. The next tool we have for you is word choices. So it's raising our consciousness around the impact of our word choices. So for example, when we replace but with yes and, we're respectfully affirming the perspective of the person that we're in conversation with. And it also gives us the opportunity to add our own perspective. So for example, yes, Kim, you said that you did place the supplies order on time and the box did end up arriving 3 days late, rather than but the box arrived 3 days late. So replacing but with and can help to neutralize a blaming tone, and it can make room for affirmation. So here I'm affirming that Kim did tell me that she ordered the supplies on time, and using the word and instead of but here opens up space for more conversation around it rather than shutting it down. It can, and over but can create space for collaboration. So I could follow this up with, Kim, what do you think we should do now? How do you think we should prevent this from happening in the future? And over but can also feel like less of an attack, which could cause Kim or my conversation partner to shut down.
The next tool in your toolkit is to ask open-ended questions and then wait for an answer. Silence allows the other person the chance to provide their point of view. Open-ended questions tend to pull out lots more information. So think of this type of question, for example, what solutions do you see to this situation? Close-ended questions are often used to verify your understanding of something or to ask someone to make a choice. So for example, my understanding is that you were 30 minutes late today, late every day last week, Ari, because your childcare provider has been sick. Is that correct? Or if your options are to stop working on this project right now or work on one additional phase and then stop, which would you choose? So those are examples of close-ended questions. So we also recommend not asking leading questions, which can sound kind of like, sort of like halfway disguising your judgment in a question format, or doing another tactic, which is sometimes like tacking the word right on to at the end. So all of those things kind of end up maybe closing off the conversation in a way that maybe we don't intend to, or it might not lead to a best sort of outcome. We also recommend not asking assumptive questions, so where the answer to the question is totally obvious. So for example, you realize handing this in to me 2 days late makes you look really unprofessional, right? I mean, something like that, not super helpful in a conversation. And or like another example might be, don't you want to be successful in this position? Again, probably the answer is yes, the person wants to be successful. So maybe not super helpful there. We also recommend not asking why questions. And so the reason for that is basically you're asking someone to defend something that they did. It puts them in this defensive mode. You've kind of backed them into a communications corner. It sort of shuts down a conversation and the discussion. Why did you write that email to your team member? You aren't actually going to get any information that's probably very helpful for moving forward. In a different way of phrasing a question about sort of like why, trying to get maybe an answer to why did you send that email to your team member would be, tell me about that email that you sent to the team member, or what were you trying to do with that email, or what did you hope would happen as a result of sending that? I think there's a neutral tone is also really helpful there, but I think tweaking sort of the way that you ask your questions, having them be more open-ended, and then just waiting for an answer, that's also really key. This is something that I, in particular, I think have a really hard time with, and you might too. Ask the question and then just be quiet. So sometimes I think, especially if you're, empathetic, you may try to fill in the silence. You may be uncomfortable with the silence or with seeing somebody that you're, having a difficult conversation with. If you can kind of see that maybe they're uncomfortable or that they feel like they're struggling a bit, you may try to sort of help them or like help the conversation along. But I caution you that it's better to remain silent and allow them time to feel what they're feeling and then to answer on their own. So I'm always, happy to kind of fill up some of the airspace and just keep talking, but don't recommend it. Additionally, some follow-up, sort of neutral follow-up questions that might encourage the other person to elaborate, and also to make sure that sort of we're understanding what they're saying. So it could be something like, can you say more about what you mean, regarding X, Y, or Z? Will you tell me more about this? Can you explain what you mean by X, Y, or Z? Then we can try to mirror back, reflect, and summarize what the person has said in order to kind of validate that we've heard them correctly and understood what they're saying, or to provide an opportunity for them to elaborate or clarify. I can think of many, instances when I've done that, and it turns out that my initial understanding of a person was a little bit off, and so I really think that this can be a super helpful tool to kind of summarize and reflect back, and then wait to see if your understanding matches the other person's understanding. So an example of what that could sound like, that summarizing could be, if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like you were, this is what happened in this situation. Is that correct? Is that what you were saying? And then kind of waiting again and listening and providing, some silence for them to answer you. Okay, active listening. So this is a continuing, so super important again. Conflict, as everyone I think who is attending this probably is aware and has experienced, conflict is actually fundamentally a request for communication, right? Active listening helps us to be mindful and present rather than in our heads thinking about the next thing is, we want to say. What is our response going to be to, this Ari's thing that she says to me? How am I going to respond to her? It asks us to be aware of and to control our own emotional responses so that we can then better empathize with the emotions of the person that we are in dialogue with. It can be helpful to remember that when someone is hurt or angry, they might just need to vent, right? When we're listening to what the other person has to say, focusing on the problem rather than the person, that can help us to try not to take what we're hearing too personally, right? So we want to be hard on the problem and soft with our coworkers and clients, ideally. You can set the stage for dialogue by disengaging your fight or flight response and trying to go into meetings or conversations with an open mind. We want to focus on really trying to understand what the other person is telling us and responding in a way that is both validating and curious. So when we're actively and effectively listening across lines of difference, identity, and or power structures too, it's especially helpful to pause instead of immediately responding, which allows the other person to elaborate. And it also allows us to process what we're hearing. Even though silence can be uncomfortable, it's a de-escalation tool and a really helpful way to show the other person that you're in conversation with that we're giving them the space that they need to be able to share their point of view. And then last, emotional intelligence. This is the last sort of tool in the toolbox or toolkit. A final note about this sort of emotions versus choices and behavior. So emotions are kind of like weather. They come and go. That's kind of a great thing to know, right? As an emotional person, I think I'm so glad to know that emotions are not forever, that we feel them and then they do go away. It's fine to feel an emotion and then you do have a choice about how you behave in response to it, right? So if I'm angry and I yell, I made that choice to yell, right? The idea is to start building an awareness of your emotions and then how you want to respond to them, or what your initial response might be, the knee-jerk response. But then be able to make a choice about that response and your behavior, right? Because you're, again, like going back to the touching your nose, you're the only person who has control over your own behavior. We're not saying you need to control your emotions. I think that that's not actually very helpful. Everybody has emotions daily. They come and go. We're all allowed to feel our emotions, but it's about how you manage your responses to other people regarding, like, related to your emotions that really matters. And also separating emotion from observable behavior of the folks that you supervise or the clients that you work with whom you might need to have the conversations. Okay, now checking in around your hard conversation. I'm going to give everybody 2 minutes again. So now let's think a little bit about this hard conversation that we've been kind of going back to. What emotion are you feeling about having that conversation? So anything you might need to lockbox or tabletop before you have the conversation. What assumptions do you have about the other person's script or story or feelings? What role might silence play? Could you use a yes and? And then what is your role in making that conversation harder potentially? What could you do differently? I'll give everybody about another 90 seconds or so. Okay, about 30 more seconds. And thank you to folks for continuing to share how you're sort of feeling about this conversation. I think that seeing this from other folks is really helpful and can kind of help normalize all the different emotions and feelings people experience when they're grappling with these difficult conversations. Okay, Ari, I think yeah.
So next we're going to go into the strategy. And again, all of these tools, all the strategies are all offerings. You can take what works for you and leave the rest. So using the framework of nonviolent, or what is also called compassionate communication, is another strategy to help us remain balanced, engaged, and control when working through a disagreement or a hard conversation with a client or a colleague. It's another strategy for keeping our emotions in their lockbox and proactively rather than reactively putting those emotions on the table. And it can help us think strategically about what our needs are and how to move forward. There are 4 steps to practicing this framework. First is stating observable behavior objectively without judgment or evaluation. For example, Kim, over the last few weeks, I've observed you've been interrupting our team members at least 3 times during every meeting. At the last meeting, the facilitator had asked you to stop interrupting, and then you crossed your arms and frowned and didn't participate the rest of the meeting. So you want to give specific examples and share those without judgment. Next is stating the impact that it had on us by sharing our feelings about the observable behavior. For this example, Kim, I'm really concerned about the impact of your behavior on the rest of the team. So my feeling there is concern. Third is stating our express needs. I'm needing collaboration and cooperation from you and from everyone on the team, and respect when it comes to following our team meeting ground rules. It's important to me that everyone on the team feels engaged in this process. And then last is making a specific request. Kim, would you be willing to be more mindful about your behavior at our team meetings? Specifically, could you try to write down the thoughts that come to mind when other people are talking, and then share those when everyone else is done, so you're not interrupting your teammates or team members. So again, go to your worksheet or your notes doc, and I want to offer you the opportunity to apply this framework to your hard conversation. So again, first is sharing your observation. What happened? What did someone specifically say or do? Second is sharing how you feel about it. What emotions are you feeling, or what emotions did you experience about what happened? Third is sharing your needs. These are the source of how you feel, and these are universal needs. So things like authenticity and ease, stability, belonging, space, compassion. And then last is the request. How specifically, how do you want your needs to be met? It's not a demand, but it's a clear and specific question that we're asking someone to do. So would you be willing to, or can we agree on? Could you please? I'm gonna give like 45 seconds just to jot down some ideas. Okay.
Okay. And I just want to note, we've gotten a few questions coming in. Thank you so much to the folks who are sending those. We are hoping to have a few minutes at the end to address those. So just hold tight and we will do our best to get to those. If we aren't able to get to your question in this particular time frame, we're happy to respond to you after the session. And follow up with you over email. And we also, as you, I think we'll be noting later, we are having a follow-up to this conversation, this training on May 17th. And so we also, can potentially address some of the specific questions in a little more detail then as well. So let me get back to this part and then we'll address some questions at the end. Responses to conflict. So in the 1970s, Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman identified 5 main styles of dealing with conflict that vary in their degree of cooperativeness and assertiveness. They suggested that people typically have a preferred conflict resolution style, and they noted that different styles were kind of more useful or not in various situations. These are the 5 approaches to conflict. You should see this image on one of the handouts that we're providing as well to take home with you. And so I'm just going to briefly go over what these all are. The 5 approaches to conflict are the following. So accommodating, that approach emphasizes cooperation instead of assertiveness. A person places their interest last and allows the other party to kind of further their interests. The accommodating approach often occurs when a party is not significantly invested in securing a victory because they don't perceive the alternative option as a significant threat. Avoiding conflict involves one of the conflicting parties avoiding communication about or confronting the problem, sort of hoping it will go away. By not participating in the problem-solving process, they effectively remove themselves from it. When using this approach, the conflict might go away if the other party doesn't press for a resolution, but the underlying differences between the parties never really get resolved. The next approach is collaborating. That style involves parties working together to resolve issues, and both sides, come to the table with sort of a win-win attitudes. Like, let's look for a solution that we can both kind of feel good about. It's a favorable negotiation style in formal dispute resolution situations like mediation, where the parties employ a mediator, but must agree on a final, binding resolution. Compromise, bargaining is the hallmark of the compromising approach to conflict resolution. The conflicting parties can identify some interests they're willing to compromise on to bring about a resolution. While the emotional level might still be high, the compromise style sometimes results in interim solutions when a full resolution might not be sort of immediately possible. So parties might reach a settlement to prevent further escalation of the conflict. You kind of think of each person gets half a loaf of bread. Compete is the final one. So that style entails the party placing their desires above those of all others involved in the conflict. Assertiveness is the hallmark of this approach, and those kind of utilizing that style of negotiation aim to address the conflict head on. It might involve high levels of emotions as the parties establish positions in what can sometimes evolve into kind of hostile communications.
So which of these 5 strategic approaches to conflict is your first reaction to conflict, your knee-jerk reaction? You can put it in the chat or you can circle it on the worksheet. It can be helpful to look at these 5 approaches to conflict, or 5 styles or conflict modes on this grid. So this grid uses 2 axes. There is assertiveness, the vertical axis, which is the degree to which we're satisfying our own concerns. And then there's cooperativeness, which is the horizontal axis. That's the degree to which we're satisfying another person's concerns. Each style has its pros and its cons, or there are different situations when it's appropriate to use that style, including competing. So you can think about these as choices on the menu. They're all strategic choices. They're like different muscles, and you can choose which one you want to engage in different situations, although you will use likely some more than others. It can be helpful to understand what our dominant approach is, although we often move between different approaches based on the situation at hand. Once we're more aware of our own default or dominant patterns, we can pay more attention to whether they're either working for us or they're not, and we can explore testing out other ones. When we're also more aware of our clients or our colleagues' conflict approaches, we can make more conscious decisions around better ways to communicate with them. So as you're looking at this grid, you can think about, when does each of these styles work for me? When doesn't a style work for me? What style do I want to try out more? And what steps could I take to do that? All those questions are on the worksheet, so we can work through them after the workshop. So again, on your worksheet, you can note which one works for you, and you can answer those questions for yourself after today's workshop. So we're almost at the end of today's training. I want to try to answer at least one of the questions, but before we do that, before you go into these conversations, you do want to prepare. You want to make sure that you're breathing throughout the day, maybe taking some time that morning to meditate or take a walk. you want to gather your tools, and we included a bunch of resources in the Dropbox, and including a bunch of Harvard Business Review articles. And one of the articles has a tool I really like that we didn't include today, but that's just the importance of showing empathy. And then we also have been talking about showing curiosity. So you can ask questions to yourself like, what's the best way for that other person to hear this message? That's an empathetic question you could be asking yourself. And again, and practice. So we're going to be having a more hands-on workshop on May 17, and I will be going into breakout rooms and actually practicing your conversations with each other. But before then, you can practice with perhaps other colleagues that you trust, or your partner or family members or friends.
Great. So you can see some additional resources listed here. As Ari mentioned, May 17th at noon, we're going to be doing part 2 of this workshop. I think the LAAC folks have dropped into the chat a link for registration. So please feel free to register, and or also you can share that with your colleagues. It's not totally necessary that you've attended this session to benefit from the second one. So it can be a standalone. So also, recommend it to other folks if you think they might benefit. And then there's a few different books listed here that we recommend check out. As already mentioned, there's some additional tools in the box link. So here is our contact information. You can see our names, our email addresses, and the OneJustice website. And I think we have a couple minutes to answer a couple of questions. If we aren't able to get to your question, we will do our best to follow up with you, but you are also very welcome to email us any specific follow-up questions you have. I think that might actually be easier if we don't get to it. I'm worried that we'll miss a question that was in the chat, and then we won't get back to it. So.
I want to note that I'm gonna read and answer Paige's question really quickly, but one thing I want to note is that we provide coaching at OneJustice, and I've been providing conflict and communications coaching and using the framework of nonviolent communication with folks. And so in between now and May 17, please email me. I would love to meet with you one-on-one and support you in practicing your conversations. I want to answer Paige's question, because that was one of the first ones I saw. With the no assumptions tool, how do we use this when there's been a trust issue with the other person, when we don't or can't trust that they'll answer our questions honestly? So what's coming to mind for me there is the importance of sharing our values. So Paige, you may have, I actually don't want to assume, but I have a value around people being authentic and being truthful and honest. And so if I was in this situation, I would want to share my values with the person that I'm having trouble with. And then you can also, again, share the observable behavior that you've noticed. So I've noticed that you said that this happened, but it looks like in the file, in the case notes, this actually happened. So what observable behavior can you point to that shows why there's been distrust?
Thanks so much, Ari. I was going to just totally underline that piece about the noting the observable behavior and being as fact-based as possible when you've had sort of ongoing trust issues with someone and you're not sure you can trust that they're being honest with you. I think looking at the facts as you see them and what observable behavior you've noticed from this person, and then referring to that is probably your best. And I love what Ari said too about the values you have. The one other question that I think I'm going to try to answer, or at least kind of jump into, and maybe we follow up a little bit more in the next session, is how do you work on sort of managing your emotions and responses when the other person that you're sort of in conversation with is angry and pushing for answers, right? That is a super challenging situation, right? And it can make you sort of feel immediately defensive. Your emotions can be running high. I think if you know that about the person that you're in conversation with, that that's a potential or a likely response, you can do everything in your power to prepare yourself to be as sort of ready for the conversation and as mindful and present and neutral, if that's your goal, as possible, right? Somebody else had asked about neutrality and what that really means sort of as a goal. And I think what I think of as of neutrality being a goal is, you know, what I know about conversations I've had that are more successful is when I tend to be have a more neutral tone and to try to be as objective as possible. If I feel emotional and I let my emotional reactions kind of run away with me, I feel like the conversations tend to be a little bit less productive. And so I think neutrality can be a really important goal in conversing with someone when you're having a challenging conversation, because, you know, it can lead to more openness and honesty and transparency between two people. And so that's what I would say to the person who asked about the emotions and or dealing with somebody who might have a really angry response. Ari, I don't know if you would add anything, but I also would love to think a little bit more about that. Maybe we can kind of dive into that a bit more in our part 2.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited about part 2. And if there's anything, we're going to do an overview of strategies and tools at the beginning of part 2. So please feel free to email us or email Megan with specific things that you want us to cover. And please do follow up with us. We're really excited about sharing these tools.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. We are so thrilled that you could join Ariella and I today. We hope this training has been useful to you, and we want to thank LAAC so much again for hosting us. We really appreciate you all being here and for being so participatory. It's really a delight to get to see your comments and your questions coming in. And so we love to be able to work with you again, actually in just about 2 months on May 17th. Please do think about joining that session as well. You can find our contact information again on this slide, and we look forward to talking with you more. Thank you again so much.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar was hosted by the Legal Aid Association of California, also known as LAAC. We are the membership organization for California's civil legal aid nonprofits. Our job is to advocate in the legislature, in the courts, and with the State Bar of California on behalf of the community of nonprofits that serve low-income Californians. In addition to our online and in-person trainings, LAAC provides coordination and advocacy for increased funding to support organizations like yours. Thank you.